Hi, I'm Tom Gruber. I'm an entrepreneur, and I was fortunate enough to be the CTO and co-founder of the startup that created Siri. Now, today I'm going to share with you some ideas about what I think helps make a successful startup. I hope these ideas resonate with you as entrepreneurs, investors, and policymakers. Now, let's start with Siri. Many people credit us with inventing the concept of the virtual assistant. Well, I have a confession to make. We didn't invent the idea. We did something more important. We created a startup that brought it to life. Our story begins in 2007, exactly coinciding with the Great Depression of that decade. Although the sky was falling in the financial markets, we actually had very little difficulty raising good money from top VC firms. And the reason is because we were inventing the future, and that's what they were betting on. So what did we pitch them? Of course, we talked about building a virtual assistant, but as I said, we didn't invent the idea. So people had tried to make AI agents of various sorts for a long time. The founders were very inspired by this video that Apple put out 20 years earlier called Knowledge Navigator, in which a professor is interacting with a virtual assistant on his little portable tablet, and it's basically what you would expect from a virtual assistant today. You talk to it in English or your natural language. It does things for you on your calendar, all these things. But that was 20 years ago. We were also aware of a large DARPA project called CALO, a consortium of machine learning researchers around the country, which was led by SRI, the institution where the founders met. Now, this project was actually about machine learning research, but the research was driven by the task of creating an office assistant. So we learned a lot from that. Anyway, but why did they fund us? Because we didn't invent this thing. Well, it was a combination of several things. We had identified a real human need. I'll tell you more about that in a second. We had a clear vision about what kind of product would meet that need. We knew what it would take to build the product, and we also knew this was the right time in history to build it. And from my experiences with companies I've founded, advised, and invested in, I believe that these are the most important factors in success. So let's see how each of these played out with the Siri startup, and then I'll apply them to a startup that's just taking off today. So the first success factor is to identify a genuine human need. Now, you might say that's obvious, but let's look at some other reasons why people often start companies. Often they fall in love with an idea, like a virtual assistant, and they believe the idea is so powerful that the product and the business will just follow. And that's, well, as you said, that's not why we started Siri, and that's rarely the case for startups that ends up changing the world. Or maybe they developed some new technology in basic research, and now they want to commercialize it. Well, that's a technology in search of a problem. Or they built an app, maybe for free or maybe for fun, and it suddenly caught on with the public. And all of a sudden, they have something on their hands they want to monetize. Or maybe they started a company because they saw a way to make instant wealth by, say, exploiting some underregulated resource or some other wrinkle in the free market. Now, those motives often work, but none are as powerful a motivator and guide as identifying a basic human need and figuring out how to meet it. That alone is not enough to guarantee success, but I find it's an important place to start. Now, what was this need for Siri? Well, to understand that, let's consider the time when we started. I said 2007. In late 2007, we got together, we talked about the idea, we got an office, and early 2008 started hiring people. Now, in the techno time continuum, this was the end of the era when user-generated content and web services had just gone mainstream, which was called the era of Web 2.0. And it was the beginning of the era of mobile computing. So just beginning mobile computing. So right between those two. Web 2.0 had created all these amazing services. Google Maps, Wikipedia, Yelp, OpenTable, TripAdvisor, and so on. If you were on a good internet connection, with a desktop computer, and you knew how to use all these services, and you had some time to take some notes and do some research, you could actually get things done like a super concierge. You could find a great restaurant and book a table. You could find a movie that was playing near you tonight. You could research hotels and book them online, and you could find a route to your destination in Google Maps. And as I said, this was also the dawn of mobile computing. The first iPhone had just been released in 2007. People could now have a computer with them all the time. And now that they were on the go, they wanted this computer to do the kind of things that you might do with that desktop. And especially things having to do with getting things done, like finding movies and booking restaurants and getting directions and things like that. But there was a gap between the bounty of what the new web was offering and what people could actually do with their phones. In 2008, there were only first-party apps on the iPhone. There was no movie, restaurant, hotel apps. The App Store didn't even open until mid-2008, and even then, nothing was integrated. And even more fundamentally, that new mobile computer in your hand inherited the graphical user interface of the desktop. You tapped on little tiny windows and keyboards, squashed into that little itty-bitty screen, much smaller than this one. The only general-purpose app on the phone was Google Search. And if you ask Google to help you do one of those things like book a great place to eat, you will get 10 blue links of non-personalized, irrelevant web pages. Now, of course, even getting that query into a search engine meant tapping on that little glass keyboard, which was tedious at best. So the founders of Siri imagined, what if everyone could have an assistant on the other end of the phone? One with access to all those desktop apps, a good internet connection, deep knowledge of web services, and constant availability at your service whenever you called. Now, executives, like the VCs we were talking to, had real assistants that did this kind of stuff for them. They even also managed their calendar, sent email, reminders, and so on. Now, we knew that all of these things were possible on the new web, but not practical on the new phone. The founders of Siri had identified this as a genuine human need, a need for computational services that were not being addressed on this mobile platform. Services to get things done. And we found a product vision that could address that need. That's where Virtual Assistant comes in. It's a way of addressing the need to get things done in your hand, on the go. And the product vision followed from the human need, which would shape our decisions about what kind of an assistant we would build and what to do going forward. Second, we had a clear vision of the product as a new user experience and as a new category of service on this digital landscape. These days, people think vision, it's just imagining, what could be. They're like, oh, I'm a visionary, I think visions all the time. But product vision isn't just vision. Product vision is a considered thing. It's a carefully designed thing. It's not something that just pops into your head in full form and correct on the first try. There are a lot of ways to envision a product, and some work better than others. So for example, we could have conceptualized Siri as the next Google, or as a voice interface to the phone, or as a mashup of web services. These are all perfectly good product concepts. They're just not the ones we chose. Because we were focused on the human need, and that told us that the most important thing to do was solve the usability problem. We had to make it extremely easy to use. And we had faith that if we built a virtual assistant that really worked, people would use it and the market would accept it. So we went for the bigger vision. All other decisions, from how much money to raise, to what kind of technologies to use, to what kind of people to hire, could be informed by this vision, this product vision of building a virtual assistant. And once we started working on it, the metaphor actually had a powerful effect at guiding people to make good decisions. So for example, as we're testing various UI ideas, we are always asking ourselves, what would a real assistant do in this case? And this process guided us, eventually over many iterations, to design the new interaction paradigm that has now become the standard paradigm for these kinds of products, called the conversational interface. And it's used by all of the virtual assistants out there. Third, we knew how to build the product. We knew that a virtual form of the executive assistant could be built in the time frame of a startup, about 1 or 2 years. Now, we didn't have anything in a lab that was just ready to package up and deliver, but we knew what it would take to build one and to create this new category. My co-founder, Adam Chire, had overseen that DARPA research project I talked about, And he was an expert in something called service orchestration, which is actually one of the key component technologies for a virtual assistant. Our chief scientist, Didier Guzzoni, had done a PhD thesis exactly on the problem of how do you build an architecture for a virtual assistant. And our other co-founder, Dag Kitlaus, came from the mobile industry and had a deep insight into how important this getting things done and we call the do engine was to the mobile ecosystem. And I had expertise in artificial intelligence and intelligent interfaces and had experience building usable applications at scale using the technologies of the internet. Fourth, we predicted that this was the right time in history to build it. Now, technologies evolve rapidly, and each new generation of products takes less time to build than the previous generation. When I first started working on AI in the 1980s, there was already speech and language systems out there, but they didn't work on the kind of open vocabulary required to do a conversational interface. And there had been countless demonstrations of intelligent interfaces, of smart interfaces running on, well, demo computers, large computers, and they were not going to run on those handheld battery mobile devices. But in 2008, we identified changes on the technological landscape that would give us the components we needed to put together the virtual assistant. One factor was that we could do big things on small devices using the new elastic cloud. Now, elastic cloud computing, which is exemplified by what you can do on Amazon Web Services, allows a tiny little startup to offer a compute-intensive services at scale to millions of users. Now, at that time, this was just beginning to be realized by startups. It meant that you could build a product without investing capital in compute infrastructure, and then add capacity as your user base grows, which again either drives revenue or the ability to attract venture capital. Another factor was the availability of web services over APIs. Remember all those web services in Web 2.0? Well, to be an assistant, we needed a computer program to be able to call Yelp, OpenTable, Google Maps, and so on behalf of the user. And for the first time in history, these services were actually built in a way that had open APIs. And in fact, when we started Siri, there were over 1,600 web service APIs, which a scrappy little startup could license for free until we started making serious money. Now, these two factors actually interacted because running AI and services in the cloud also meant that we could achieve high-speed, low-latency connectivity among all those service APIs because they're all working in the cloud too. And so it's maybe not clear to you if you just ask Siri a question, you get an answer. But actually, every time you do a Siri request, it has to call from 5 to 10 APIs that were back then running on all kinds of different people's servers. And then it has to integrate all the answers back. But that all could work because they were all in the cloud, and therefore they had super high bandwidth and low latency. Now, the third technology that was critical was the broadband to the mobile device. And we had predicted that it was soon to achieve an inflection point. So we knew that to be viable as an assistant, we would need to be able to quickly bring up a secure connection and drive a rich conversational UI. And at the time we started Siri, remember, first iPhone had just been created, and the mobile phone was on 2G, which was pretty slow. But we knew that 3G and 4G were coming, and that usage of all services would track what happened in wireline broadband. And when you get more bandwidth, you get more users, which tracks more services, even heavy services. And so you get the right kind of flywheel there of increasing returns. So we basically bet that we would get the internet we needed into mobile devices, and people would start demanding services that we could provide as the new bandwidth was deployed. And overall, we basically said, we think that you can rely on the phone as a mobile-friendly interface, where all the computation is about the UI, to personalized cloud, big compute in the cloud that was doing the AI and the services. And we called this big think and small screen. Now, the fifth lesson we learned from Siri was the value of navigating the changing seas. Now, a startup lives in a constantly evolving technical ecosystem. And even while building the product, it's constantly looking on the horizon to see what might change. And for many startups, this is important because they often have to do with the dreaded pivot. Oh my God, of an abrupt change in strategy when the initial assumptions you built the company on no longer hold. Now, for Siri, we were doing well, and we didn't need a pivot, but we kept our eyes on the horizon. So about a year into the Siri project, with one round of VC funding, we had built what the industry calls a minimally viable product, MVP. Now, conventional wisdom in the startup world will tell us that you just ship the MVP, get your user feedback, iterate, add features, scramble to get the market share as fast as possible before everyone starts copying your idea. But with the guidance of our board, we decided to not ship the MVP. Instead, we would take another year to add one more feature. Can you guess what it was? Speech recognition. That's right. Voice input was not there in Siri's MVP. Speech recognition technology has been around for a long time, but when we started building Siri, there weren't that many users of speech systems, and they were mostly like dictation on the desktop or something like that. It wasn't going to work in mobile. And also, because of that, mostly their limited vocabulary and their quality wasn't so good. However, around like a year into the project, we were watching some experiments in putting speech recognition on mobile apps. And we saw that as mobile app usage took off, there were more people being able to use the speech systems, and that drove data into the speech systems that they could train on and get better at. And so, because we predicted that there was going to be rapid growth because of 3G and 4G and other things that were going on in the mobile industry, we knew that there was going to be enough data so that the speech recognition algorithms could be trained. So right around that time, when it was like time to, the conventional wisdom says ship the MVP, we basically said, no, let's take the time and add speech. Let's bet that speech is going to be good enough within the next year to ship. And that's what we did. We added speech recognition to the rest of the stack, which was already formidable, including natural language understanding, dialogue management, service orchestration, and of course, this new conversational interface. And with all the pieces in place, we had what it would take to make a truly revolutionary new product and new category. And of course, the rest is history. A few weeks after the app appeared in the App Store, we got a call from Steve Jobs. And a year later, Apple launched Siri as an intrinsic part of the user interface on every new iPhone. Now, looking back now, when it first came out, people were kind of amazed at how hard Siri was to do. And wow, a startup did this thing, isn't that great? And yeah, we were very proud of it. But then they were amazed at how quickly the competition came in, with Google and Amazon coming in with the same product. And this is because these companies, as you know, have infinite resources. And once we showed that it could be done, and what kind of user experience works, it was possible for competitors to figure out how to build it. And this is another reason to be careful with your timing. And don't always assume that you should ship that MVP. So stepping back, we see that Siri didn't come from a single breakthrough in technology. And of course, simply having a good idea wasn't enough. Siri was an integration of a set of powerful components to create a new experience. And in most cases, the startup did not invent the component technology. We just assessed it, matured it, and integrated it. The most important things to our success came from starting from a clear human need, having a clear product vision for meeting that need, knowing how to build it in the current point in techno-history space-time, and nimbly navigating that ecosystem. After we integrated Siri into the full product line at Apple, I stayed on to run an innovation group to explore technologies and designs that would help with adding intelligence to future products. In 2018, I retired and began impact advising companies and nonprofits who can use technology to have a big impact on humanity. And I'd like to share with you now the story of one of these companies, because it actually shows how these same factors that influence Siri's success can be applied to startups today, like yours. Now, this company is called Migraine.ai. The founder, Özkan Sikmaz, honed his skills as a champion athlete and technologist and business leader in his native Turkey. After an epiphany near the peak of an especially challenging free solo climb, he decided he wanted to dedicate his talents to making a significant impact on the human condition. And in his own family, he saw a compelling human need. His mother, who had a limited education, struggled to use the smartphone he gave her. But more importantly, she suffered terribly from migraines, which, if you don't know anyone who has migraines, they're debilitating and they're notoriously hard to treat. So Ozcan set out to produce a product that would be so easy to use that even his mother could use it, and that would do something to help her and millions around the world who suffer from migraines. He studied the problem with migraines, and he found that although there are a few drugs that can alleviate symptoms, there really is no effective prevention or cure. The most important variable is to know when to intervene with therapy. So he saw an opportunity to use technology, which isn't a drug, but what can technology do? The technology can predict the onset of a migraine. So Ozcan knows about AI and AI technologies, and he was on top of some recent results that were showing the ability for people to use machine learning to produce AI models that could predict disease from symptoms. Okay. And he knew that would require data, personal data, tracked over time. So he put together an informal clinical trial of a bunch of migraine sufferers in Turkey and asked them about all the things that might be symptoms, according to the literature. Now, many of these factors are subjective, like how are you feeling stress? But there are a few objective measures that are very helpful, namely vital signs, such as heart rate variability, respiration, temperature, and blood pressure. And these are standard measurements when you go to the doctor, right? Now, if they're taken every day, in combination with subjectively reported symptoms, they actually are very helpful in predicting a migraine. That was the hypothesis. After gathering the data from the clinical trial in Turkey, Ozcan found that they could, in fact, build an AI model that was predictive of migraine. In addition to the expected correlations, it actually found subtle combinations of triggers, like one after the other, that most people didn't even know were predictive of migraines, and especially not patients. So he found that it was really important, if you wanted to do the predictive model, to do daily data and to build personalized predictions. So now Ozcan kind of knew that the product was going to have to get data directly from the patient on a daily basis. So what's the next question? How's he going to solve the usability problem? It's costly and cumbersome to send every patient the instruments to measure vital signs and to train them to use them effectively. That just wouldn't work. So Ozcan found an AI researcher who was world-class at inferring vital signs from, guess what? A selfie video on your phone. It turns out that there's enough information in selfie videos taken by the patient using her smartphone to infer things like heart rate. For example, the pulse can be detected by computing the average color of the skin and how it varies over time. Now, almost everyone knows how to take a selfie video or could be trained to do so, so it's a usable solution to this problem of daily data acquisition. And so now Ozcan had a clear vision of the product, a way to detect vital signs and other health data from the smartphone using AI to infer these digital biomarkers from the video data, and then also AI to predict the onset of a migraine given the symptoms. Now, this is simple enough to be used every day. The only other alternative is to go to the doctor every day, which is not feasible. So, possible breakthrough here. Also, he had the right time in history. Ozcan realized that this was the time to do this product because smartphones are pretty much ubiquitous. And they're being distributed all over the places in the world that don't have them right now. And this was really important because part of the ambition is to bring migraine relief to people all over the world, including places that the doctor is hours away. But what's happening right now is that these telehealth services are rolling out to places like Africa, where this could actually be delivered as a practical solution. So Ozcan packed up and went to Silicon Valley and recruited that world-class researcher I talked about, who now leads his AI team. Now, by the way, I know this person. I'm not going to tell you his name because I don't want you to recruit him. But the more important point is this man is passing up lucrative offers at the usual suspects because he wants to work on this problem. Now, that's another reason why it's good for startups to solve fundamental human needs, because you can get good people to join you in your mission. So with the right team in place, they started building the app and began clinical trials in the US to get the data to refine the models. And by early 2020, they were poised to make a breakthrough product in migraine prediction. And then the pandemic struck. Now, for many startups, maybe some of yours, COVID-19 has been a major disruption, of course, and leading some to stop operations altogether. However, Ozcan and his team saw COVID as an opportunity to navigate those changing seas. It turns out that key enabling technology in migraine.ai, the determination of vital signs from videos, is extremely useful for COVID screening. Because just like in migraine detection, predicting whether you have COVID is a function of many factors, subjective and objective, but the objective ones are basically vital signs. And the sensitive tracking of those measurements over time is very critical for early detection. So the startup did a pivot while staying true to the core product vision. They built a COVID screening app called Virologic, which takes daily measurements on the phone from a selfie video and other data on your phone like exercise and sleep if you have it. And if you don't want to show your face, you can put your finger over the lens and it will take a video of your finger. Then you can determine the vitals from that. The company's AI team has worked day and night since the spring to refine and optimize this model. And their AI model can now not only detect vital signs like heart rate and heart rate variability, but they've also developed a COVID-specific classifier that can hear you make a cough like this, and it can tell the sound of COVID coughs distinguished from the sound of other kinds of coughs, which is really amazing. When the team made this decision to pivot, some staffers were nervous that they might not succeed, but the bet seems to be paying off because as far as we know from published literature and from partner companies, Virologic now is the most accurate, comprehensive, and robust of such models in the world. I mean, it can't just take the clean, pristine lab data. It has to work in all light conditions, all old phones, crummy lenses, all that stuff. And those partner companies I mentioned are actually bundling that technology for vitals detection or just including the Virologic app itself in their offerings. So you're going to see this technology rolled out this year. Now, the goal for these COVID screening apps is to help people determine whether they're infected prior to getting a biological test. And of course, since it can be done every day at home with no equipment, it can be rolled out very quickly to a large population. And as we know, as much as 40% of virus transmission is occurring by people who don't know they have it. So even a small improvement in the prediction of COVID could make a really big difference on our society. Imagine if this could be applied routinely to video calls over the internet, preserving privacy while alerting people to potential infection. Imagine if it could be given to every essential worker who is risking their lives to serve the public and for whom it's essential to isolate themselves if they do get infected. Imagine the kind of impact this technology can have to help us cautiously return to school and work. I just shared the story of two startups, 10 years apart, each launching at just the right moment in techno-history space-time. They both started with the goal of addressing a real human need, developing a strong vision of a product to address it, and knowing with data and experience how to build it. And finally, navigating the changing ecosystem while they're building it to adapt to the needs and opportunities of the day. I hope these insights provide you with some guidance and inspiration as you build the future. Thank you.